Back here on CBS Sports HQ, the expectations and Heisman buzz around college quarterbacks before the season and now is certainly very, very different. So we now have some question marks around guys who had sky-high expectations. Drew Allar, who is coming back to Penn State, Arch Manning, even if those expectations might have been really, really too high because of his last name, they were still there, right? So getting a look at the odds to be taken #1 overall, we have the side-by-side from the preseason to what they are currently for the 2026 NFL draft. So Nuss plus 320 in the preseason. Now it's 12-1. Drew Allar going from 13-1 to plus 4,000. And then Arch Manning was 15-1 to be taken #1 overall in the 2026 draft. And now he's at 35-1. So let's welcome in our college football analysts, Kanell and Mike Renner. We're going to talk about some concerning college quarterbacks that we're seeing up until this point of the season. Want to start with Arch Manning because, Danny, we had a conversation saying, I don't know if he'll ever be able to fit these expectations just based off of how insane they really are because he is a Manning. And we did get to see glimpses of his success last year, stepping in for Quinn Ewers at certain points. But what is not really clicking for him right now on the field, DK?
All of it. I mean, it's hard. I mean, and it's been, I thought it was going to be a roller coaster, right? You mentioned he did start a couple games, but it was a much lesser competition. Then all of a sudden you lose some pieces on the offensive line. You're working with new wide receivers. Matthew Golden's now in the NFL, and it just hasn't worked out based off of those expectations. But he still has shown flashes of what we thought we were going to get. There were big plays to be made. He had a beautiful throw against the Gators, but he also had an interception. Like, it's just been more of a roller coaster ride, which, call me crazy, I think that is normal for somebody that hasn't played much yet at the college football level. And he hasn't played in environments like the Horseshoe and like the Swamp this past weekend. So I still think it's way too early to write off Arch Manning and say, well, he can't get better. There always is room for improvement. And this, to me, is normal for a quarterback, his first time being the guy at Texas. I think he can play his way out of it. My biggest concern now is the mental aspect. Like, how much does the criticism, the adversity he's been through, how much does that impact him mentally, his confidence? Because that becomes a bigger problem. But I still see him back there, hanging in there, making plays with his legs, making some throws. I think the consistency will come, but the inconsistency, I think, is fairly expected, at least for me.
And so, Mike, in your eyes, how much has his draft stock plummeted? Because we were talking about him, potentially going #1 overall not that long ago.
Yeah, if you're talking about the 2026 NFL draft, it's on life support. It's actually dead. He's not coming out this year. I think we can all say that. And that's fine because he was going to turn 21 like the day of the draft. He is still very young. At this same age, Joe Burrow hadn't taken a start in college football. Bo Nix was still at Auburn, and it would have been laughed out of an NFL boardroom if you said we're going to pick this guy based off of what he did on tape. So there is room for him to grow. He has 2 more years of eligibility after this. And Danny hit it. Like, you still see every single week a throw, a play where it's like, that's what it needs to look like at the NFL level. He has the arm talent. You still see some flashes of that processing ability. It's just the bad decisions need to go. And I have to say this. College defense, everyone talks about the NFL defenses, how much better and how much more complex they've gotten. College has kind of figured that same way, too. So these guys who are first-year starters, it is difficult for them. You need reps under your belt, especially given he played very low level of competition in high school as well. So this is him really being thrown into the fire. He has time to recover that draft stock. It just ain't going to be 2026.
Let's talk about Penn State, a very different quarterback situation. I remember going into this season, we were looking at the Big Ten saying, hey, this is one of the only teams that doesn't have this unproven quarterback situation. They have Drew Allar. He's coming back. He's got the experience, right? And now they're coming off a loss to UCLA. Not a great game, obviously, for Penn State all across the board. But, Mike, is Drew Allar maybe looking like a day 2, maybe a day 3 pick right now?
He's looking at like almost UDFA at this point, truthfully, just because he cannot hit open targets. So unfortunately, that was the story for him as a sophomore, as a junior, and still now, and it's even gotten worse, truthfully, than what we saw last year. I think the biggest stat that really nails this on the head is it's not just like downfield that he can't hit guys. It is easy throws within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. His completion percentage on those throws is over 10 percentage points behind guys like Fernando Mendoza and Dante Moore. 10 percentage points is a chasm in the NFL. That's just untenable how infrequently he's able to pick up the ones that, Danny can still pick up right now. So I do think that Drew Allar's stock right now, it is very, very low. The arm, the frame, it only goes so far. At some point, you have to show improvement. You have to show you can be accurate. And right now, he's just not.
Danny, what do you think the biggest issue is right now with Drew Allar?
He just hasn't taken that next step. I mean, it's something we've been waiting for. After his first full season as the starter, you look at the stat line, you're like 25 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. This kid's going to be the next superstar. And then it was like, all right, well, maybe he's a little too safe with the football and he's a little bit too much of a game manager. So the next season, you're like, all right, maybe he's going to take that next step. And again, he has pretty good touchdown to interception ratio. He's pretty good as a game manager. But as Mike talked about, even now, he just has not been able to take that next step forward in his game because he's got the prototypical size. He's pretty mobile. He's got an arm strength, but he's just not taking that next step forward. Now it's becoming an issue where all of a sudden he's not making some of these routine throws. I do think he's been probably one of the bigger disappointments, way more disappointing for me than Arch Manning. Arch Manning has an excuse. He still has time to get better. Drew Allar does not, and that's why this is such a disappointment for Penn State fans as well, because for a long time we heard the receivers. Oh, it's got to be the receivers. Then early in his career it was the play caller. He's got to get a play caller. Well, they go out and they get Andy Koltnicki last year. This year, they go out and get a slew of wide receivers, and yet the offense still looks incompetent at times. And unfortunately, I think a lot of that does fall squarely on Drew Allar's shoulders, where he just hasn't elevated his game. And it's hard to explain why he hasn't been able to take that next step. Maybe there's still hope in the back end of this season that he can finally kind of play his way out of this funk. But if you go based on everything you've seen to this point, it looks like he's just kind of plateaued where he is, which is a decent college quarterback, not a great one.
All right, let's get to Cade Klubnik because, again, this was a guy that had a lot of Heisman buzz going into this season and kind of turning into a disappointment. So, Danny, is this coaching? Is this how Dabo has built the team? Like, does any of that have anything to do with Cade Klubnik's performance on the field in your eyes?
So I'll say this. I don't know how Mike felt about Cade Klubnik coming into the season. I never bought into the NFL hype. Like, he's not the biggest guy in the world. He doesn't have a cannon for an arm, but I did trust him to at least manage this system and play pretty well within the system. Now, he's had excuses too. A lot of these quarterbacks have, and you can't do it by yourself. Antonio Williams, who was his best receiver, was out for a majority of the season so far. The run game quite hasn't been there. They've really had a tough time replacing what in Phil Maffa. Before that, they've had, an ETN back there. They've had always a strong running game. And now Garrett Riley's system is coming under fire as well, like where the system isn't doing him many favors either. But another one who has really padded his stats versus lesser competition, and then against the better competition is where he's been exposed more. But this season, for whatever reason, against level competition, he's kind of played down somewhat and struggled with turnovers. I think this might be the example of somebody trying to put the team on his back when he's really not capable of doing it, trying to force the issue when plays aren't there. And that's where you get into trouble with the decisions. You start turning the ball over, as we're looking at a couple from the Georgia Tech game, where I think Cade Klubnik really, I never bought into the upside as an NFL talent, but I really did think he was a good college quarterback who is struggling with a lot of issues around him. And I think he's been pressing too much this season.
So, Mike, what about you? Were you buying into the NFL hype for Cade Klubnik, and what were your opinions of him in the preseason versus now that we're sitting at this point of the college season?
I bought into the year-on-year improvements. That was the biggest selling point with Klubnik, because he goes from a guy who started games as a true freshman to then really struggled as a sophomore. But then by the end of his junior year, I mean, the game he had against Texas last year in the playoff was probably the best game of his entire career. So I'm like, hey, if this guy just continues this upward trajectory, we can start talking about him as a first-rounder, because Danny did hit the nail on the head. He's not a physically impressive quarterback by NFL standards. He has probably below average tools, you'd say, when you compare him to the 32 starters around the NFL. So when you have that, it basically has to be on-field performance where you separate yourself. You better be locked in. And you just haven't seen that. And I think the biggest area where I've been disappointed is him attacking the blitz. He has not been able to recognize consistently where to exploit it, Some of that's maybe not having his best receiver, Antonio Williams, for a good portion of time. But his 85.6 passer rating against the blitz this year, it's like that is way below where you want to see a guy. You want to see a guy carve up the blitz if he's someone like Cade Klubnik. You want to see him every single time be able to exploit it. I mean, Cam Ward's passer rating was 128.2 last year when he was blitzed. So that's where I've been disappointed. When you're projecting to the NFL, if you can't do that by your third year of college, you're going to have a difficult time starting in the league.
So, guys, we know that the NFL values the quarterback position in the draft and really above all else. But we've seen some underwhelming QB classes in some recent drafts. Mike, do you think maybe that NFL teams are going to kind of pass on some of the quarterbacks that are going to be in this 2026 draft class?
I think there's a good chance, not only because this quarterback class is kind of meh, but there's a guy at the top who could be a franchise changer in Ruben Bain from Miami. It could be like the 2017 class where there's still talent, but you saw the Cleveland Browns say, Myles Garrett's different cat. We're going to go Myles Garrett. I think that's how it could be, especially if someone like the Titans, especially if someone like the Bengals ends up with the #1 overall pick. And it's like they kind of already have the quarterback. Ruben Bain's a game changer, so it would not surprise me if someone passes on quarterback, even if they need it, for a guy like Bain.
There are a couple of quarterbacks. Mike's been all over Fernando Mendoza, who has a huge game this weekend against Oregon. It'll be a really good litmus test how he does against the top-tier competition. But you talk about size, at 6'5", 240 pounds, he can run, he's mobile, he's got a cannon for an arm. I think it all depends, like Mike was saying, what team is picking #1? And then is there a team that's within range that could trade up potentially, and do they fall in love with one of these quarterbacks? Then I think you could see that unfold. I also would say don't sleep on Carson Beck at Miami. He's a quarterback who really, I had my doubts about him. He was coming off from major surgery with his elbow, leadership concerns after he left Georgia. Why did Georgia let him go? He has stepped up, and I saw him in person. He's big, he's physical, throws a beautiful deep ball. I don't think his arm strength was affected at all. And I heard his players raving about his leadership capabilities. Plus, he's playing really good behind a really good offensive line. I think Carson Beck, who's played himself this year into what we thought we were going to get 2 years ago. Remember, 2 years ago when he was at Georgia, he finished up a year. He was projected to be last year's top 5 pick potentially. I think he's played himself back into that competition by what he's done this year for the Hurricanes.
Carson Beck trying to, take a page out of Cam Ward's book if he can. Danny, Mike, we certainly appreciate it. Talking about some concerning and disappointing college quarterbacks that we've seen up until this point. In the meantime, make sure you check out the Cover 3 podcast. Danny and the crew always talking about the biggest headlines that are out there in college football. You can watch right now by scanning that QR code on your screen.